The universe has a strange way of bringing people together. Sometimes, the person who changes your life forever is connected to your past in ways you could never imagine. This is exactly what happened to Marcus Reynolds, a struggling single father who stopped to help a young woman with a flat tire on a rainy night. Little did he know, she was the daughter of Judge William Harrington, the same judge who had sentenced him to prison 10 years earlier, forever altering the course of his life. What follows is a story of redemption, forgiveness, and the unexpected ways our lives intertwine. If you're moved by this story, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more powerful real-life stories that remind us of our shared humanity. Marcus Reynolds gripped the steering wheel of his beat-up 2008 Honda Civic, the windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the torrential downpour. The digital clock on his dashboard read 11:42 p.m. He was exhausted after pulling a double shift at the warehouse, his back aching from loading pallets for 14 hours straight. But the overtime pay would help cover Elijah's school supplies for the new semester, and that's all that mattered. At 38, Marcus's face carried the weathered lines of a man who had seen more hardship than most. His dark hair was beginning to gray at the temples, and his once athletic frame had grown leaner with the stress of raising a 13-year-old son alone while working 2 jobs. The rain hammered against the roof of his car as he squinted through the foggy windshield, desperate to get home to relieve Mrs. Patel, the elderly neighbor who watched Elijah when Marcus worked late. That's when he saw her, a young woman, probably in her early 20s, standing beside a sleek BMW with a flat tire. She was soaked to the bone, her blonde hair plastered to her face as she helplessly stared at her phone, likely searching for signal in the rural stretch of road between the warehouse district and the suburbs. Marcus's first instinct was to keep driving. He was tired, it was late, and he'd learned the hard way that getting involved in other people's problems rarely ended well for him. But something made him slow down. Maybe it was the memory of his late wife, Sarah, who always stopped to help others, regardless of the inconvenience. Or maybe it was the thought of his own daughter, who would have been about this young woman's age if she had lived. Whatever the reason, Marcus found himself pulling over, his hazard lights blinking in the darkness. "Need some help?" he called out, rolling down his window just enough to be heard over the rain. The young woman looked up, relief washing over her face. "Oh my God, yes. My tire blew out, and I have no service. I've been standing here for almost an hour." Marcus nodded, pulling his car in front of hers and grabbing the small umbrella he kept in his glove compartment. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. He stepped out into the rain and approached her, holding the umbrella over her head. "I'm Marcus," he said, offering a tired smile. "Olivia," she replied, her teeth chattering slightly from the cold. "Olivia Harrington. Thank you so much for stopping." The name didn't register with Marcus at that moment. He was too focused on the task at hand. "Let me take a look at that tire. Do you have a spare?" Olivia nodded, pointing to the trunk. "I think so, but I've never changed a tire before." Marcus set to work, kneeling in the mud as the rain soaked through his jeans. His hands, calloused from years of manual labor, worked quickly to loosen the lug nuts and position the jack. Olivia stood nearby, holding his small umbrella over him despite his protests that she should keep it for herself. "You're getting soaked," she said, concern evident in her voice. Marcus chuckled. "I'm already wet. Besides, I'm used to it." As he worked, they talked. Olivia was a law student at the state university, heading home after a late-night study session at a friend's house. She lived with her father in Oak Ridge Hills, the affluent neighborhood that Marcus drove past every day but had never entered. She spoke animatedly about her classes and her dream of becoming a public defender. "I want to help people who don't have a voice in the system," she explained, her eyes bright despite the dismal weather. "There are so many people who get lost in the legal process simply because they can't afford proper representation." Marcus nodded, focusing on tightening the last lug nut on the spare tire. "That's a noble goal," he said, thinking of his own experience with the justice system, how different his life might have been if he'd had someone like Olivia in his corner 10 years ago. With the spare tire securely in place, Marcus stood up, his clothes clinging to his body, mud caking his jeans from knee to ankle. That should get you home, but you'll want to get a proper tire tomorrow. This spare isn't meant for long-term use. Olivia's gratitude was palpable. I can't thank you enough. You're a lifesaver, truly. She reached into her purse. Please, let me pay you for your trouble. Marcus held up his hand, shaking his head. No need. Just pay it forward someday. Olivia hesitated, then nodded. At least let me get your number. My dad would want to thank you properly. Against his better judgment, Marcus gave her his number. He didn't expect to hear from her again. People like Olivia, from wealthy families in Oak Ridge Hills, didn't typically maintain connections with people like him. But it felt good to help someone, to be reminded that despite everything life had thrown at him, he could still make a positive difference, however small. As he watched Olivia drive away, her taillights disappearing into the rainy night, Marcus had no idea that this chance encounter would set in motion a series of events that would change his life forever. He had no way of knowing that Olivia's father, Judge William Harrington, was the same man who had sentenced him to 5 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit, a sentence that had cost him his career, his reputation, and precious years with his children. The universe does indeed have a strange way of bringing people together. Marcus arrived home just after midnight, his clothes still damp from the rain. Mrs. Patel, a kind-hearted widow in her 70s, was dozing on his worn couch, a book open on her lap. She startled awake as he closed the front door. Marcus, dear, you're soaked, she exclaimed, her Indian accent still strong despite her 30 years in America. Got caught in the rain helping someone with a flat tire, he explained, hanging his wet jacket on the hook by the door. How was Elijah tonight? Mrs. Patel smiled, her wrinkled face lighting up. That boy of yours is something special. He finished all his homework and then helped me make samosas for tomorrow's community center lunch. He's sleeping now. Marcus felt a familiar swell of pride. Despite everything, the loss of his wife to cancer when Elijah was just 5, the wrongful conviction that separated them for 3 crucial years, the struggle to rebuild their life after his release, his son was growing into a compassionate, responsible young man. Thank you for staying late, Marcus said, reaching for his wallet. Let me pay you extra for the additional hours. Mrs. Patel waved him off. Nonsense. You would do the same for me. She gathered her things and patted his arm. You're a good man, Marcus Reynolds. Don't let the world convince you otherwise. After she left, Marcus checked on Elijah, who was sleeping peacefully, his science textbook open beside him. Marcus gently removed the book and pulled the covers up to his son's chin. He stood there for a moment, watching the rise and fall of Elijah's chest, marveling at how much he looked like Sarah, the same dark curls, the same gentle slope of his nose. In the quiet of his small apartment, Marcus allowed himself to feel the weight of his exhaustion. He showered quickly, the hot water soothing his aching muscles, and then collapsed onto his bed. As he drifted off to sleep, his thoughts returned to the young woman he'd helped. There had been something familiar about her, though he couldn't quite place it. Perhaps it was just that she reminded him of what his daughter might have become, bright, ambitious, full of purpose. His last thought before sleep claimed him was a silent prayer that his own son would have the opportunities that had been denied to him. The next morning, Marcus woke to the sound of Elijah moving around in the kitchen. Sunlight streamed through the thin curtains, a stark contrast to the previous night's storm. He glanced at his phone, 6:30 a.m. He had just enough time to get Elijah to school before heading to his morning shift at the convenience store. Dad? Elijah called from the kitchen. There's someone on the phone for you. Some lady named Olivia? Marcus sat up, surprised. He hadn't expected her to actually call. He took the phone from Elijah, who gave him a curious look before returning to his cereal. Hello? Marcus said, his voice still rough with sleep. Marcus? It's Olivia, from last night. I hope I'm not calling too early. No, it's fine. Is everything okay with the car? Yes, everything's perfect. I just wanted to thank you again and, well, my father insists on meeting you. He wants to express his gratitude in person. Would you be willing to come to dinner at our home tonight? Marcus hesitated. Dinner at an Oak Ridge Hills mansion with people who lived in a completely different world from his own? It seemed like a recipe for discomfort. But there was something in Olivia's voice, a genuine warmth that made it hard to refuse. I appreciate the offer, but I have my son to think about, Anne. Please bring him along. Olivia interrupted. Dad loves having young people at the table. He says it keeps him young. Marcus looked at Elijah, who was pretending not to eavesdrop while methodically spooning cereal into his mouth. A proper dinner in a nice home might be good for him. They rarely had opportunities like this. All right, Marcus finally agreed. What time should we be there? Olivia gave him the address and suggested 7 p.m. As Marcus hung up, Elijah abandoned all pretense of not listening. Who was that? Where are we going tonight? Marcus explained the situation as they finished breakfast and headed out the door. Elijah seemed excited by the prospect of dinner in Oak Ridge Hills, though Marcus tried to temper his expectations. Remember, we're just going to say thank you for the invitation, have a polite meal, and then come home. These aren't our kind of people, Elijah. Elijah frowned. What does that mean? What kind of people are they? Marcus sighed, regretting his words immediately. I just mean they're different. They have different lives, different experiences. Like Mrs. Patel is different? Or like Mr. Chen at the grocery store is different? Elijah challenged. You always say we should judge people by how they treat others, not by where they live or what they have. Marcus couldn't help but smile at having his own words turned back on him. You're right, buddy. I'm being unfair. Let's go with an open mind, okay? The day passed in a blur of work and responsibilities. Marcus's shift at the convenience store ended at 2 p.m., giving him just enough time to pick up Elijah from school before heading to his warehouse job. His supervisor, understanding the rare nature of the invitation, allowed him to leave early for once. By 6:30 p.m., Marcus and Elijah were dressed in their best clothes, which, for Marcus, meant the one button-down shirt he owned without frayed cuffs and the pair of khakis he wore to job interviews. Elijah wore the outfit they'd bought for his school concert last spring, now slightly too small but still presentable. As they drove through the gates of Oak Ridge Hills, Marcus felt a familiar knot of anxiety in his stomach. The last time he'd been in this neighborhood was 10 years ago, when he'd worked as a landscaper for some of these very homes. That was before the arrest, before his life had been derailed by a case of mistaken identity and a justice system more concerned with quick convictions than truth. Olivia's directions led them to a stately colonial home set back from the road, with perfectly manicured gardens and a circular driveway. Marcus parked his Honda next to a sleek Audi, acutely aware of the contrast between his rust-spotted vehicle and the luxury cars surrounding it. Wow, Elijah whispered, his eyes wide as they approached the front door. This house is bigger than our whole apartment building. Marcus squeezed his son's shoulder. Remember, it's not the size of the house that matters, but the character of the people inside it. Olivia answered the door herself, dressed casually but elegantly in jeans and a simple blouse that probably cost more than Marcus's entire wardrobe. Her face lit up when she saw them. Marcus. I'm so glad you could make it. She turned to Elijah with a warm smile. And you must be Elijah. Your dad told me you're in 8th grade. I bet you're excited for high school next year. Elijah nodded, immediately at ease with her friendly manner. Yes, ma'am. I'm hoping to get into the science magnet program. That's impressive. And please, call me Olivia. Ma'am makes me feel ancient. She ushered them inside, giving them a brief tour of the ground floor. The house was tastefully decorated, with hardwood floors, high ceilings, and walls lined with bookshelves and family photographs. It was wealthy without being ostentatious, comfortable rather than showy. "My father should be joining us any minute," Olivia explained as she led them to the living room. "He had a late meeting at the courthouse." The word courthouse sent a small chill down Marcus's spine, though he couldn't say why. Perhaps it was just the lingering trauma of his own experiences with the legal system. "Your father works in law too?" he asked, trying to keep his tone casual. Olivia nodded. "He's a judge. Has been for almost 20 years now. It's partly why I decided to go into law myself, though I'm more interested in defense work than sitting on the bench." Before Marcus could respond, they heard the front door open and close, followed by footsteps in the hallway. "Olivia? Are our guests here?" a deep voice called out. "In the living room, Dad," Olivia replied. And then he was there, standing in the doorway, Judge William Harrington. Tall and distinguished, with silver hair and the same blue eyes as his daughter. The same blue eyes that had looked down at Marcus from the bench 10 years ago, cold and unforgiving as he delivered the sentence that would destroy Marcus's life. The recognition was immediate and mutual. Judge Harrington's smile froze on his face, his eyes widening in shock. Marcus felt as if the floor had dropped out from beneath him, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure everyone in the room could hear it. "Mr. Reynolds," the judge said, his voice carefully controlled. What an unexpected surprise. Olivia looked between them, confusion evident on her face. "You two know each other?" Marcus swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly dry. "You could say that." The tension in the room was palpable. Elijah, sensing something was wrong, moved closer to his father, while Olivia's gaze darted between the two men, trying to understand the sudden shift in atmosphere. Judge Harrington was the first to recover, his professional demeanor sliding back into place like a well-worn mask. "Olivia, why don't you show young Elijah the game room? I believe there are some video games that might interest him. Mr. Reynolds and I have some catching up to do." Olivia hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave in the midst of such obvious tension, but eventually nodded. "Come on, Elijah. Dad has a pretty impressive collection of games." Once they were alone, the two men stood in silence, the weight of their shared history hanging between them like a physical presence. "I should go," Marcus finally said, his voice tight. "This was a mistake." "Please," Judge Harrington held up a hand. "Stay. At least give me a chance to talk." Marcus laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Talk? Now you want to talk? Where was this willingness to talk 10 years ago, when I was standing in your courtroom, telling you I was innocent?" The judge's face tightened, but he didn't look away. "You have every right to your anger, Mr. Reynolds. But I think we both deserve the opportunity to have this conversation." Marcus wanted nothing more than to walk out, to grab Elijah and never look back. But something kept him rooted to the spot, perhaps the same sense of justice that had always driven him, the belief that truth should prevail, even when it came years too late. "Fine," he said at last. "Let's talk." Judge Harrington gestured to the leather armchairs by the fireplace. "Please, sit."